Hey, how are we gonna get to the moon if we can't talk between three buildings? I can't hear a thing you're saying. Jesus Christ. Hey! Oh, it's got a fire in the cockpit.
Gus Grissom, a mechanical engineer, United States test pilot, and American astronaut, achieved a great deal of triumph throughout his life, receiving numerous medals during his time in the Air Force. After 14 years of being in the Army and Air Force, his time as an astronaut slowly began. Being in space was something Gus really cherished and was a vital part of his life, so vital that it was the tragedy that brought him to his death. Grissom graduated from Mitchell High School in 1944 and enlisted into the military. After he graduated from basic training, Grissom was stationed in San Antonio, Texas. Grissom was discharged at the end of World War II. He then enrolled in Purdue University and majored in mechanical engineering. He graduated in 1950 with the goal of becoming a test pilot. Grissom enlisted into the United States Air Force during the Korean War. After flying approximately 100 missions, Grissom received the Air Medal with a great deal of triumph. Grissom returned to the United States in 1952 and served as a jet instructor in Bryan, Texas. A few years later, he went to the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, to study aeronautical engineering at the Air Force Institute of Technology. After that, he completed several months of test pilot training at Edwards Air Force Base in Kern County, California in 1956. Finally, realizing exactly what he wanted to do, Grissom returned to Wright-Patterson in 1957 to triumphantly serve as a fighter jet test pilot. During the 1950s, NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, was developing its space exploration program, Project Mercury. The organization was considering more than 100 military test pilots as possible candidates to become the first American astronauts. In April of 1959, Grissom was one of the 7 men selected for Project Mercury.
My career has been serving a nation, serving a country, and here's another opportunity where they need my talents, and I'm most grateful for an opportunity to serve in this capacity.
The astronauts had to undergo rigorous training in preparation for space missions.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
Grissom had his first mission in 1961, which was part of NASA's Project Mercury series. The mission was called Mercury Redstone 4, but he nicknamed it Liberty Bell 7, due to the capsule being in the shape of the Liberty Bell. A crack was even painted on the outside of the capsule by the engineers to be more representative of the Liberty Bell. The number 7 was added to the title because there were 7 astronauts that were part of Project Mercury series.
Roger, this is Liberty Bell 7, the clock is operating.
This mission was the second American manned suborbital spaceflight that was used as a stepping stone to study and prepare for other future manned orbital flights. Liberty Bell 7 was a triumphant flight that lasted a total of 15 minutes and 37 seconds, and it ended by a splashdown tragedy. With its chutes open, the craft drifted down to the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. While the landing was smooth, Grissom's departure from Liberty Bell 7 was difficult. The craft had an explosive hatch, which blew open suddenly, filling the cabin with water. Grissom struggled to get out and swam in the waters nearby, watching as the spacecraft sank.
Just laying there minding my own business, and then pow! The hatch went, I looked up and I saw nothing but blue sky and water starting to come in over the sill.
4 years later, he got assigned another mission. As the commander of Gemini 3, Grissom got the chance to orbit the Earth 3 times. He and his fellow pilot John Young also conducted experiments and evaluated the spacecraft. Less than 5 hours after they launched on March 23, 1965, Gemini 3 safely returned to Earth. They were triumphant. Shortly after their mission was complete, Grissom and Young were awarded the Distinguished Service Medal from the President of the United States. Earlier Mercury and Gemini flights had been the first steps towards NASA's goal of reaching the moon, testing how humans behaved in space and how to do technical spacecraft procedures. The first manned mission, an Earth orbiting mission, was originally designated Apollo Saturn 204, or AS-204, but was later renamed Apollo 1. Because of Grissom's triumph from Gemini 3, he was selected to command the first manned mission. Alongside Grissom was a fellow spaceflight veteran, Ed White, an Air Force lieutenant colonel, who was the first American to make a spacewalk on Gemini 4 in 1965. Along with the pair, Roger Chaffee, seasoned Navy lieutenant commander, who joined the program in 1963. Although a rookie in space, he had spent years supporting the Gemini program, now getting a chance to fly after 5 years in the program. Every astronaut in the Apollo program had flight experience, and some were test pilots. They were accustomed to seeing machines under development while dealing with delays and assessing the airplane's readiness for flight. In the view of many of these astronauts, the Apollo command module just wasn't ready yet.
I recognize that there is some risk, but we just try to take as much of that out as we can during the pre-testing.
Engineering changes were still in progress as NASA prepared for the countdown test. The launch rehearsal test on January 27, 1967 was a plugs-out test, which means it is a test to determine whether the spacecraft would operate nominally on internal power while detached from all cables and umbilicals. The test had been performed numerous times before on Mercury and Gemini capsules, and it was considered non-hazardous because neither the launch vehicle nor the spacecraft were loaded with fuel or cryogenics. NASA, however, failed to recognize the many safety issues involved in simulating the space condition on the ground. The morning of the test, the crew suited up and detected a foul odor in the capsule, which took about an hour to fix. Then the communication system acted up. Shouting through the noise, Grissom vented,
Hey, how are we gonna get to the moon if we can't talk between 3 buildings?
with communication problems dragging on. The practice countdown was held. Then just before 6:31 p.m. came a frightening word from the spacecraft. Since the test was categorized as non-hazardous, it received less scrutiny, and there was no one ready nor prepared when the spark ignited the oxygen, starting the fire inside the cabin. Mission Control realized what was happening only after the reception of an unclear message from the crew, combined with high-pressure readings. When they finally looked at the monitor that was providing a view of the capsule's window, the command module was already covered in flames. Under the high-pressure condition described, the hatch was impossible to open from either side, and the crew died when the spacesuit's oxygen feed was disconnected by the fire burning the tubes.
It was all over in one stunned, horrifying second.
America's first 3 Apollo astronauts
So it was this past week when Gus, Ed, and Roger
were trapped and killed by a flash fire that swept their moonship early tonight during a launch pad test
living at the Cape almost full-time.
at Cape Kennedy in Florida.
Further, the hatch door that intended to keep the astronauts and the atmosphere securely inside the spacecraft turned out to be too tough to open under the unfortunate circumstances. The astronauts had struggled in vain to open the door during the fire, but the pressure inside the spacecraft sealed the door and made it impossible to open. At last, the door was open, but it was too late.
And while we grieve at the death of an astronaut, that does not stop us from exploring space. For many of us, that loss strengthens our resolve and makes our work here ever more important. As we remember the crews of Columbia, Challenger, and Apollo 1, and all the talented men and women who dedicate their careers to America's space program.
It would take more than 18 months and extensive redesigns before NASA sent more men into space. Since then, several changes were made to the design of the Apollo spacecraft to improve crew safety. The flammable oxygen environment for ground test was replaced with a nitrogen-oxygen mix. Flammable items were removed. A new respect developed between the astronauts and the contractors concerning design changes, which were implemented more effectively. Most notably, the door was completely redesigned so that it would open in mere seconds when the crew needed to get out in a hurry. The agency also met Kennedy's goal of landing a man on the moon in 1969 during Apollo 11. Decades later, NASA recalls the Apollo 1 incident every January during an annual Day of Remembrance. An exhibit honoring the Apollo 1 crew was opened at the Kennedy Space Center in 2017, displaying the hatches that were on the spacecraft. The exhibit was done in consultation with the astronauts' families. Like many other astronauts, Grissom knew his work was dangerous but important. He once said, "If we die, we want people to accept it. We're in a risky business, and we hope that if anything happens to us, it will not delay the program. The conquest of space is worth the risk of life."
Bye.